health systems work for UAC in Africa, an actions framework. And this session will be chaired by Dr. Delano Dovlo. Dr. Dovlo retired as Director of Health Systems and Services at the WHO Regional Office for Africa in July 2018. He is proud to this served as WHO representative to Rwanda and Health Systems Advisor at WHO headquarters. He trained as a general practice and public health physician in Ghana, the UK, and the US, and has practiced for about 38 years. Dr. Dovlo graduated from the University of Ghana Medical School and has an MPH from the University of Leeds, UK. He has a membership of the West African College of Physicians and is a fellow of the Ghana College of Physicians and Surgeons. He is currently based in Ghana as an independent consultant on international health sector development issues. Ladies and gentlemen, shall we receive Dr. Delano Dovlo. Round of applause, please.
Thank you very much, Salom. Thank you very much, our audience. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this session, which involves a number of my former colleagues from WHO. We have 5 panelists, as you can see. We will start with Dr. Adam Ahmad, who is a human resource for health planning officer at the WHO Regional Office, and who technical expertise is in strengthening health information systems for human resources and HRS strategic planning, including workload assessments, etc. He came in through his own country of Central African Republic, where he's working in the UNFPA country office. He's a PhD holder in demography and also has had a lot of experience in applying economic statistics and so on to health. So that's Dr. Adam Ahmad. I'll introduce all of them now so that when I call them to come up, we hope your memory works well before I say about them. He'll be followed by Dr. Juliet Nanyonga Oral, who is medical officer in charge of health policy, strategies, and governance, and is head of the health systems team in the country supporting for Eastern and Southern Africa based in Harare. And her work also involves working with the 20 countries in Eastern and Southern Africa to strengthen their health systems. And over the past 18 years, she's done a lot of work on health systems development, and with research experience covering different parts of health systems and health economics. He holds a medical degree from Makerere in Uganda and an MSc in health economics from York in the UK and a PhD from Belgium. They'll be followed by Dr. Nana Chumdanso. Dr. Chumdanso is also a public health and preventive health physician, 20 years working in the area of public health practice, strategy evaluation, currently an independent consultant in quality improvement and large-scale change, and is an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Maternal and Child Health and Healing School of Public Health, the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. But most important, is also the CEO and founder of what's called MAZA, a social enterprise that provides emergency health transportation in remote rural areas of Ghana. She previously worked as a senior program officer with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where she led the Project Fights Alive program. We are happy to have her join us today. And finally, we have Mr. Derek Munene, who is speaking on electronic digital health and UHC. He's the regional officer for digital health in WHO AfHEA, with an MSc in health information systems management, also has an MPH, and holds a Prince 2 project management practitioner's certificate. He previously worked with the US Centers for Disease Control and Prevention as a health analyst and applications development manager. He also worked with the USAID's National Pharmaceuticals Management Project. And so we are very happy to have him bring the electronic diversity to the panel that we shall have now. And so without much ado, would like to invite Dr. Adam Akpat to lead us off with the preliminary presentation. Sorry, I clearly didn't introduce one of my participants, my panelist, because his name doesn't appear on my list here. So let me quickly do that. I would like to introduce Mr. James Avoka Asamadi, who has been just appointed to the position of Technical Officer Human Resources in the country support team in Harare. Until now, he's been working with the Ministry of Health in Ghana and also partly with the WHO country office as a health economist. He's a Commonwealth scholar and holds postgraduate degrees in health economics and health policy from Birmingham and from the University of Ghana. And I'd also like apologies for skipping my good friend James in the introductions. So we'll start off with Dr. Adam leading us with his presentation.
Good afternoon. Bonsoir. Ma présentation sera en français. Je vais parler en français et ma présentation sera en anglais. Donc je vous demande de prendre votre écouteur. Ok. Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais vous entretenir rapidement sur la situation de la couverture sanitaire universelle en Afrique, dans la région africaine. Avant d'aborder cette question, je voudrais d'abord donner une idée, c'est-à-dire sur les principaux facteurs qui ont permis des progrès dans le domaine de la santé en ce qui concerne les OMD. Il faut d'abord souligner que les résultats obtenus par les OMD dans la région africaine ont été largement positifs, mais très insuffisants pour atteindre les objectifs de ces OMD. Il y a eu des progrès qui sont mitigés dans la réalisation de ces OMD. Par exemple, dans le cadre des objectifs liés à la santé, comme comparé à d'autres régions, par exemple, la région africaine a eu un taux de diminution de 8,1% de la pauvreté entre 1990 et 2025, ce qui est bien inférieur à l'objectif de 28% fixé par l'OMD. En ce qui concerne les progrès réalisés en matière de santé, la plupart des pays de la région n'ont pas atteint les objectifs, sauf 39 pays sur les 47 ont pu réduire l'incidence du VIH-Sida. Il y a aussi une réduction significative de 55% de la mortalité de moins de 50 enfants par rapport à l'objectif de réduire de 2 tiers. Aussi, par rapport aux autres OMD, par exemple l'OMD 5, qui est relative à la mortalité maternelle, il n'y a que 2 pays dans la région, par exemple le Cap-Vert et le Rwanda, qui ont atteint cet objectif de réduction de la mortalité maternelle. En ce qui concerne, mais il faut aussi dire que grâce aux OMD, il y a eu une plateforme globale, une plateforme mondiale qui a pu attirer un certain nombre de bailleurs de fonds dont certains pays africains ont pu bénéficier et ils ont fait des progrès. Par exemple, le Fonds mondial de lutte contre le sida, le PEPFAR, c'est-à-dire le plan d'urgence du président américain pour la lutte contre le sida, la Fondation Bill et Melinda Gates et le Fonds Gavi ont permis à beaucoup de pays de faire des progrès dans ce domaine. Cependant, la plupart de ces fonds ont créé des programmes verticaux au détriment d'autres conditions, telles que les maladies non transmissibles, les maladies tropicales négligées et surtout les systèmes de santé nationaux ont été laissés pour compte, n'ont pas bénéficié suffisamment d'investissement. Et donc on a constaté que la pénurie de personnel de santé a persisté au courant de cette période. Il y a 37 pays sur les 47 qui souffrent d'une pénurie grave de personnel de santé. Il y a aussi des progrès dans les soins prénatals et les accouchements par un personnel qualifié. Mais ces progrès sont très insuffisants pour permettre d'atteindre les objectifs. Et on a constaté aussi que de grandes disparités géographiques subsistent au sein de ces pays. Alors, avant d'aborder cette question de la couverture sanitaire universelle, il est important de dire un mot sur le cadre d'action de la couverture sanitaire universelle adoptée par les pays de la région africaine pour permettre d'atteindre cet objectif. Donc, nos présentations vont s'articuler autour de ces cadres d'action sur lesquels je vais aussi m'appesantir sur un aspect qui concerne la couverture sanitaire universelle, surtout les dimensions qui concernent ce cadre, les trois dimensions qui relèvent de la couverture sanitaire universelle. Donc ces dimensions sont la disponibilité des services essentiels, la couverture des services essentiels et la protection des risques financiers. Donc nous allons vous donner quelques chiffres par rapport à ces dimensions pour avoir une idée de la situation actuelle des pays africains en ce qui concerne la couverture sanitaire universelle. Donc, le premier... Donc, le premier, en ce qui concerne la disponibilité des services de santé, il faut constater ici que la situation varie considérablement d'un pays à un autre, allant d'une faible disponibilité des services, c'est-à-dire la couleur rouge, jaune et orange, et jusqu'à la disponibilité, de forte disponibilité des services dans certains pays. Donc ce faible score, ces faibles résultats témoignent que la situation est préoccupante en ce qui concerne l'atteinte de la couverture sanitaire universelle dans la région africaine. Cela signifie aussi que les systèmes de santé ne fournissent pas les services dont leur population a besoin. Ensuite, il y a l'accès essentiel aux services, l'accès aux services essentiels. On voit aussi que le système de santé de la région ne peut assurer en moyenne que 32% de l'accès potentiellement possible aux services de santé. Donc l'indice varie considérablement d'un pays à l'autre, allant d'un minimum de 0,12, qui est la République centrafricaine, qui est mon pays, à un maximum de 0,10, qui est île Maurice. Donc sur seuls 3 pays, par exemple, île Maurice, les Seychelles, Sao Tomé, qui sont des petits États insulaires en développement, comme on les appelle, ont un indice d'accès supérieur à 0,7. Ça veut dire que tout le continent, aucun pays n'a pas cet indice-là. Ok, on me dit d'aller un peu plus vite, alors je vais aller plus vite. Quand consolider tous ces indicateurs, cela montre aussi que sur seuls 3 pays, par exemple, seuls 3 pays, la plupart des pays de la région ont un chemin, ils ont un long chemin devant eux pour arriver à la couverture sanitaire universelle. Alors, par rapport à cette situation, c'est vrai, il y a l'OMS qui est actuellement en train d'impulser un changement, un focus sur la santé. Et ce focus s'est traduit par la 13e programme de travail qui va de 2019 à 2020 et qui porte sur la promotion de la santé, la sécurité sanitaire et les plus vulnérables. Donc, l'objectif est d'atteindre 3 milliards, de personnes d'ici cette période-là. Donc, il s'agit d'appuyer les pays dans l'atteinte de la couverture sanitaire universelle, et puis les urgences et autres questions sanitaires. Donc, pour conclure, je vais m'appuyer sur quelques messages clés. Dans la plupart des pays, les données montrent que la disponibilité des services essentiels sont encore à un niveau très bas. L'une des raisons est que les pays se sont concentrés sur l'amélioration de la couverture et de la protection contre les risques financiers sans effort significatif pour s'assurer qu'un éventail plus large de services est disponible pour leur population. Donc, c'est ce qui ressort de ces données-là. Les investissements dans les personnels de santé, les infrastructures, les matériels de fourniture restent encore très faibles dans la région, comme l'indique le faible taux d'accès des 0,3 dans la région africaine. Donc voilà un peu la situation de la couverture, de la marche vers la couverture sanitaire universelle dans la région africaine, où la plupart de nos pays africains ont encore un long chemin à parcourir, à l'exception des petits États insulaires en développement qui font partie de ce continent. Je vous remercie. Merci.
Thank you, Dr. Adam, for that overview. May I invite Dr. Juliet Abiodoro to give her presentation.
Thank you, Chair. I'll talk about governance, which is part of the actions framework that the African region is putting together to guide countries to strengthen their health systems. I will look at taking forward health system governance in the WHO African region. Why are we interested in this? I think we all appreciate the increasing role of governance in building health systems. Again, the stewardship capacity must be able to enforce accountability systems. And we look at accountability from 2 fronts. One is the social accountability, where we are accountable to the population that we serve, but also bureaucratic accountability, which is within the hierarchy of any system. We talk of audit systems, we talk of reporting lines, we talk of performance assessments. So we are looking at accountability from those 2 fronts. And once this capacity is in place, we must be able to realize that function. Then mitigating corruption, integrity, and public confidence. And I think given that many of our countries are dollar dependent, this is really important. You may ask why it's not part of our accountability system. Maybe it is, but through the consultation processes, the participants of these meetings insisted that it's better it stands out. Give it the due attention it deserves, so that we really pay attention to this issue that we usually do not want to talk about. And these mitigation measures must be put in place such that we curb corruption and improve efficiency in all our processes. Now, the putting in place the policies, where we talk of the strategic vision of the health sector and policies and strategic plans, those regulations, legal systems, but even more important is to I think we can appreciate that. Because we cannot talk of accountability systems when we don't have regulations, legal systems, and policies that really spell out what needs to be done in order to improve accountability. So they are not standalone, they are interlinked, and all these must be in place. The other point I want to make is when we talk of health governance, we need to be mindful of the fact that it is embedded within the broader governance of the government. We cannot have a flourishing health sector governance amidst a struggling broad government governance. And that's what you see on the arrow on my left, it will be on your right, that the governance for the health sector is rooted in the historical and the social aspects of any country. It's also rooted within the political and economic context of the country, and we need to pay attention to that. Then the other third point I want to make is that we talk of governance at the national and subnational level in decentralized settings. And of course, these two levels will have different mandates, which again must be spelled out. When I talk about organizational structures and the mandate, that refers to both the national and subnational level. And you realize that when we come to the functions that are below the stewardship circle, these will work out differently at the national and subnational level, which means we have these governance drivers, but we need to appreciate that when we go through the levels of government, when we go through the levels of the health system, we need to know which one is strong where. For example, the setting of policies, regulation, and legal systems is largely a national function, it's not a subnational function. Then my last point on this systematic presentation is that governance is not an end in itself. Governance should help us to work towards strong system resilience, good quality care, and subsequently achieving policy and sustainable development goals. Now, this is my last slide, and I want to conclude that this list of governance drivers is not exhaustive, but this is what was seen as the most important within the African context in order to help us strengthen the stewardship capacity of health systems. Context is very important. The drivers will work out differently in the different contexts, and you will be mindful of that. And they are not weighted. Every time we present a list of factors, a list of functions, the question people ask is what is more important? We cannot answer that here, but we also think that the question maybe is not called for, because we all appreciate that each country will be going through a process, more so that health governance is within the broad government-wide governance. Context is very important, so the issues will vary by national and subnational level. And also to highlight that the drivers are not static, and we need to know how the development of a country moves on, even timing. The drivers will play out differently. Maybe they will be more important at one point, and as the country settles, as the country develops, more factors will be more important than others. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juliet. We'll proceed immediately and invite James Awokasubadi to talk on human resources and youth.
Thank you and good evening. We've seen from Adam's presentation that Africa made some progress during the MDG era. As we know, the ambitious nature of the SDGs means that we need to accelerate the progress faster than we did during the MDG era. And at the center of this is the health workforce. No matter the equipment, the infrastructure, the system put in place, if there's no workforce, the services cannot be delivered. But Africa faces actually a very serious issue around the health workforce where we have a myriad of challenges. So here I'm going to just highlight a few of the challenges for us to be able to discuss further. If you look at this graph tells you the one to your right, but to my left is the share of the various region, the share of the disease burden, that of the workforce in 2004, and this is where Africa is. Africa had about almost 25% of the world disease burden, but less than 5% of the workforce. And with all the noise we made around MDGs and all the money that went into the effort, by 2014, we didn't make too much progress after 10 years. So what does it tell us? One of the issues that we grapple with at the moment are that we are still grappling with shortage of health workers at health facilities to deliver services. Our workforce is evolving. We are beginning to see more younger people, with the older ones retiring and leaving quite very quickly, and very little room is given for mentorship and to maintain quality of care. We're getting migration issues are not being resolved as quickly as we thought. The quality of training has become an issue of concern for everyone. And even there are even questions whether how we title the training, the programs we train is really what Africa needs, whether there's a need for us to train and look at fit for purpose workers. The skill mix issue is still a problem in almost every country, and that is very linked up with inequitable distribution of the workforce, where we see in some countries we have a lot of workers in one area and a few in another area, or very highly skilled workers in one area and low skilled workers in other areas. And of course, the people who can afford would move from where there are no workers to where there are workers to seek care. And when they do that, they increase the workload at where there are workers. And that gives a room for them to ask for more human resources. And we also still have issues around motivation and productivity, which we all agree is not optimum, but how to deal with it is actually a very tricky one. All of these things surround the issue of governance and information to be able to make progress. The World Health Report of 2006 actually identified a threshold of 2.3 density of doctors, nurses, and midwives that was necessary to achieve at least 80% of skilled birth rate. With this threshold, Africa was estimated to lack about 800,000 nurses, doctors, and midwives. By 2015, we had made progress by just 13%. By that time, in 2006, countries that fell below that threshold of 2.3, and they also fell below skilled delivery cover of 80% were considered as countries that were experiencing human resource for health crisis. By 2015, only two countries, Ghana and Equatorial Guinea, managed to join the league of countries that had met that particular threshold. It reinforces the fact that we have not made too much progress. And the progress we made from 5% increase in the workforce from Zambia to about 273% in Equatorial Guinea. Going forward for SDGs and universal health coverage, it's estimated that Africa needs about 6.1 million more doctors, nurses, and midwives by 2030. We are going to be able, at the current rate, to produce about 3.1 million. That means we're going to have a shortage of almost 3 million doctors, nurses, and midwives. Unfortunately, however, we might be able to have money to employ just 2.4 million of those we are going to produce. What it means is that we're going to have about 700,000 workers who are trained, skilled, but they will not have jobs. Not because they don't want to work, but because we will not be able to employ them because we don't have money. And this is where there's actually going to be a challenge. We're going to have a challenge where the population needs more workers to serve them. We have produced some, but we don't have money to be able to employ all. And that is where the big issue is, and we need to start talking about it as far towards UNC. Now, this graph gives you some evidence that is emerging from analytical work that WHO is currently undertaking in various countries. And if you look at this graph, there's a red looking line that is at the very top there that tells you how much this particular country has committed for the health workforce. And there's, unfortunately, my pointer is not helping me at this point. There's a green line that tells you, based on the staffing needs of the country, based on their own targets, where that line is. For this particular country, they have more physical space to employ, but above what they need, what they have considered as their national staffing norm. But the challenge is that they are producing at a very low level, so they are not even able to produce to meet their need, and so they have more money to employ, but they don't have the workers. There's another country with a sharp contrast, where in this country they have more need than their money, which is the red looking line, so their need is above their needs at the moment, and they are also producing at a level that is slightly above what they can afford. So there are a few unemployed health workers. And there's another country, this is actually for Ghana, where you find out that we have produced more workers in aggregated than we have physical space to employ. So we're going to have quite a number of unemployed health workers. And these are things that point to the fact that we need to begin to take off ways of improving not only the production but also the absorption of the workers we are producing. You see another one here that talks about Togo, as many as 890 doctors being trained, but if you look at the trail from migration to retirement and those who are unemployed, and you realize that those who were serving the population, 90% of the population were just 150 doctors out of the 890 that was trained. And it tells you that there's certainly a missing link in being able to attract them to rural areas and motivate them enough to stay there. There is a changing age structure of the workforce. This is something from Ghana. You can take a look. This is about midwives. I would like to stay on here to talk about this. 10 years ago, represented in that blue line, about 59% of the midwives were between the ages of 46 to 55. Now, as we speak, about almost 71% are in the age of 25 to 35. Now, what is happening is that more young workers, but fewer experienced people to mentor them. So there's an implication on quality of care, and these are people that who are going to cater for the health sector for a long time, so we need to think about it. Can we move the people to the rural areas? Evidence from Ethiopia shows that, look, at the current salary rates, just 10% of people would agree to go to rural area to serve their country. If you double the salary, you have less than 50% going. You actually need to triple the salary before up to 50% of doctors will agree to go to rural areas. Maybe this is something that may not be sustainable, and what do we do about it? In summarizing, the issues around the workforce, whether around governance systems, inadequate planning, capacity, labor market mismatches where we have surplus and shortage coexisting at the same time, inequitable distribution of the workers between rural, urban, and even the same urban area can be between various locations. Then the issue of low remuneration and incentive, suboptimal productivity and efficiency, the work environment is actually not the best, and the coordination of HR information is actually weak, and that is where we don't have much information to plan. In going forward, WHO's approach to the UHC provides a lot of opportunities for us to be able to work around the health workforce. WHO is undertaking a number of scoping missions in countries that is highlighting workforce issues now to be put on the table for discussion. And there's a global strategy for the health workforce. There's a regional roadmap up to 2025 that has been endorsed by the region. And there's also a code for global international recruitment that countries are to respect so that we can address the issue of migration. There are a lot of tools that are also available, and capacity has been built around workload indicators of staffing need, national health workforce account, health workforce observatories, and so the opportunities are really there, the tools are there now for us to be able to address the workforce issues. Of course, community health workers is also one other area that is beginning to have a real impact on the workforce and cause our match for UHC. Now, WHO has done some work around and other aspects around what would be the price tag of achieving the health-related SDGs. About $3.9 trillion. Of this amount, 36% is to be spent on the health workforce, and this will create about 23 million more jobs for the health sector. Don't forget that for every employment you do at the health sector, there is unattended employment in other sectors, which leads to economic growth. So let's advocate for more resources for health, but more importantly for the health workforce. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, James. I almost got upset when he was about to allude to all those above 46 were elderly. He quickly caught himself and said something else. Thank you for that. We've just had a sort of starting with an overview around the framework that is being shown. We went on to discuss governance as one of the important factors around reaching the SDGs. And James has put us on the path of the human resource needs and some of the analysis as to where we are with that. Our next speaker is Nana Chumdanso, who will be speaking on the role of the community health worker, which I think James mentioned in passing, and on some of the work that our office has done on that. Nana.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon. This presentation is a manuscript, based on a manuscript that has been prepared by 3 of us. In terms of background, I believe I colleague James already mentioned about the disproportionate burden of global burden disease that Africa has versus the health workforce, so we know about that. In the context of that, lay community health workers have been playing an increasing role in delivering primary healthcare services at the community level for several decades. And now as we think about the health constraints we have in human resources for health, yet the push for UHC and increasing the coverage for primary health care, there's more demand for community health workers. Yet we know that community health workers vary in terms of role, governance, funding and implementation support. So one of the questions we have to ask ourselves from a policy perspective is what are the system requirements for effective lay community health worker programs at large scales that we can leverage on to help us achieve UHC in the African region. And before I go any further, I want to make sure that we're all agreed on what the definition of community health workers are. In this particular context, we're talking about lay community health workers, not those who are nurses or community health, like health extension workers in Ethiopia that had 1 year or more professional training. In this particular context, we're talking about lay people who've been trained in some way, one way or the other, in the context of the intervention that they're about to deliver, but they have no formal professional or paraprofessional certificate or degree training. In the context of communities, WHO is very clear that community health workers should be selected by the communities where they work, should be members of the communities, and should be supported by the community, but at the same time also supported by the health system. So what we did, the few of us, WHO commissioned a technical paper which then resulted in a policy brief that has been published, available on the WHO website, and then we've recently distilled it into a manuscript for publication based on a literature review that was systematic, narrative, as well as scoping. The key findings from this literature review was that the evidence base on community health workers, lay community health workers, is extremely mixed and uneven. Some countries have more publications related to the work community health workers have done than others. In addition, there seems to be much more focus on the vertical programs that are well-funded, such as IMCI, malaria, pneumonia, etc., and less so on vertical programs that are not as well-funded. Nonetheless, the evidence was sufficient enough for us to be able to conclude a few things. So here we have the focus, again, with the policy question in mind. What are the system requirements for us to be able to leverage community health worker programs to help us achieve UHC within the African context? In the context of that policy question, there were 4 requirements that we found from the literature. One is that to have a functional, and I insist on functional here, you see it highlighted and underlined, that many lay health worker programs that did not have these features, and most of them were limited, not sustainable. What we determined was that to have functional ones, we need community health workers to be embedded, connected to the health system. We need to be very clear about their role, what they can and cannot do, how often. We need to have sound program design and people management, and then monitoring, learning, and adaptation as we go along. So I'll go into a little bit of depth with these 4 findings. The first one is around, it's important for us to see community health worker programs as part of the whole health service delivery. As you heard from my previous presenter, the health workforce is the professional health workforce that we've talked about, in addition to these community health workers. They are not standalone. However, they do span boundaries between the health system and the community, and we need to leverage that, especially as we look at multi-sectoral approaches to healthcare. We know that health and education and sanitation are all linked, and because these are community health workers, they can help us cross those boundaries as we work on health system interventions that also have relevance to sanitation and health. Number 2, this is a very busy slide, and I don't expect you to get into all the details, but there was an attempt to define the different types of community health worker programs and what we need to do we, the health system, the professional health system, need to do for them depending on what we expect from them. So we did a typology that really looked at the when, the what, and the who and the how. And the when is really key because if you look at the first column of this table, how often we engage them should define how we, what we invest in them in terms of training and supervision and tools. So if these are people we're investing in once a year or twice a year for some social mobilization or something very time limited, we design differently. Whereas those that we expect to do daily work or weekly work, like the DOTS program, Observe Treatment for TB, or postpartum care, when we expect people to visit postpartum women in their homes twice in the first week after delivery, those people have more of a commitment, and we then should also have a commitment to them in thinking about how we train them, how we supervise them, the tools we give them for reporting, etc. Related to that is how we manage them. Again, going back to the points my previous presenters have made, how do we recruit them? What are the selection criteria? Are we skewed towards one gender versus another, one age group versus one age category versus another? How well do we do with initial training and then continuing training, recognizing that these are lay people who may not understand how the body works, if it's INCI, they understand enough about the side effects of the treatments that they are given, etc. Supervision came up as a very important part of how we manage community health workers. And then incentives. We need to recognize that in many of these communities, there's very little formal employment. Most people are involved in farming or some other type of livelihood that requires a lot of their time. So if we're taking away their time from this community activity, we need to recognize that and to a certain extent to remunerate them as much as possible. In some settings that we reviewed, financial incentives were absolutely critical. In other settings, non-financial incentives like perhaps some kind of signage, t-shirts, hats were sufficient to keep people motivated. But that often was in the setting where they didn't require so much of their time. So context was very important in designing how best to manage these programs. The literature also really emphasized the need for us to think carefully about the logistics and infrastructure support, especially for community health workers that are involved in commodities of some kind. If they're distributing something, we in the professional health service need to make sure that those supplies are available regularly. They don't have shortages because then they lose credibility in their jobs, and the outcomes that we're working towards in terms of primary health care cannot be achieved. So we can't underestimate the importance of logistics and infrastructure. Neither can we underestimate the importance of financing, especially sustainable financing, if we believe we need these lay people for another decade or so. All right, and then finally, we found lots of experiences where there was like a one-year program or two-year program, pilot projects that were never scaled up. Oftentimes the data systems that support them were not robust enough. And so the message that came clearly was that we need to have information systems for these CHW programs that are simple, timely, they're integrated into the routine PHC, which is linked to our supervision and supportive management of them. That was on the previous slide. And then we need to, as much as possible, use those data for learning and improvement and adapting based on the context. One size does not fit all. All right, so this is my last slide. The first point in terms of conclusion is number one, lay community health worker programs are not a panacea for increasing coverage. They can be adjunctive, but they cannot be the solution. We know that. Our communities demand more from us than lay health workers can offer. We recognize that there's enormous potential for them to strengthen health systems in the African setting, especially related to preventive, promotive, and very limited curative primary healthcare services. But we can't expect them to achieve their goals or our goals for them without appropriate training, supervision, the motivation, logistics, and the linkage with the formal health system, especially with referrals when things are beyond their level. And then thirdly, we cannot forget that we need to keep on investing in the professional HRH in order to achieve the high-quality primary healthcare beyond the level that the CHWs can offer. And I believe that's my last point.
That's so precisely timed to the, as soon as the red light comes on time, she's finished her last sentence. And so again, one of the aspects around eliciting quite a bit of debate around how do we utilize community health workers and what that form or shape. There's quite a lot going on around. Should we make them part of the formal health workforce? We pay them. I personally, if I were a community health worker, would worry about getting into the bureaucracy that is part of the health system that we are in and trying to get paid out of our ministries of health. Now that I'm out, I'm able to say these things. It's fine. We now move on to the next speaker, who is Mr. Derek, and then they will be talking about using digital health to accelerate UX. So we've come from some form of the very basics, working communities, to look at whether we can leverage digital health, electronic technology, and so on, and how that can improve our UX approach. Derek.
All right, good afternoon. This is the last presentation, and I'll be speaking in Portuguese. I'm just joking, to be honest. Just to wake you up. All right, so I'll really be speaking to four things in this particular presentation: definitions and background, the current situation, and also enablers for digital health and key messages. Most of this, the content of this presentation is drawn from our third survey of digital health that addressed about 125 countries, 29 of which came from the African region. Now, I'll start off with the subject area of digital health, which is a new area, which really simply, as we heard on night number 1, from the Vice President, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation representative, is really the inclusion or the utilization of ICTs in health. That's pretty much what we mean by digital health. And historically, this has been referred to as e-health and health, and so these two terms were meshed together to refer to the subject of e-health. Within the actual framework, we actually see digital health as an enabler for those menu of options that the action framework leads countries to, an enabler to really strengthen the health system's activities and approaches. Now, globally, since 2005, we have been tracking key indicators to measure the uptake of digital health both globally and also in the region. Today, we have 58% of WHO member states that have been advancing in terms of putting in place some infrastructure to manage the implementation of digital health at country level, and usually these take the form of e-health strategies. And related to that has been the question of ensuring there's sufficient governance, protection of patient information and patient rights. And so 55% of countries have moved towards ensuring that that registration is in place. Now, a key area that has emerged as a key opportunity in the digital health space is mobile health, specifically utilization of mobile phones, which globally has drawn a lot of attention and also within the African region as well. So 87% of countries have actually reported at least utilizing one or more mobile applications for health services. Now, within the African region, we see that there's remarkable progress in terms of e-health tools. For example, the most common implementation of digital health is mHealth, mobile health. And this really has been interesting to observe because of its diverse nature. We have a number of countries that, for example, use mHealth to support messaging as in health promotion. We have a flagship program with the International Telecommunications Union called the Be Healthy Be Mobile, which is used in Burkina Faso and Senegal. It really is a health promotion system that helps to send messages to people that are on diabetes or facing a number of NCDs. Next to that is social media, which is this particular one, social media. And what we see with the social media approach is that most countries have used this platform as a way to engage with the community. For example, in Botswana, if you actually go on the social media page, you see the engagement between the population and the Ministry of Health in terms of satisfaction, when it comes to seeking health services and etc. The next is the area telehealth, which is healing at a distance. Ghana actually has embarked upon, implementing a telehealth program to ensure that health services are accessed where the people are, as close to the people. And one of our flagship countries we have is Cabo Verde, a very diverse country with 10 islands, which has been able to actually connect all the islands using fiber connectivity with a central hub where consultation is provided at no cost. A number of countries are using telehealth, and really telehealth for UHC is one of the low-hanging fruits. We also have e-learning, which really is our window of opportunity, and 19% of countries at least have reported using one or more methods of e-learning, particularly for the midwifery program. And what we see with this approach is the ability to be able to train health workers where they are without bringing them to a central place or having to send them to get education in a tertiary institution. Next is medical record system. We had the Vice President here talking about deployment of medical record systems. And again, this is an interesting area because when we say universal health coverage, how do we know that we're covering people, that we're reaching them if we don't have a form of medical record keeping? So we see medical records as a growing area, not trivial, but it's a way for us to be able to track who is receiving what service and where. And lastly, big data and analytics. This is again another area that is attracting interest, and it's really our opportunity to use information technology to provide more and better insights beyond what the naked eye can see when you're looking at the data. Now, in terms of governance for digital health, a number of countries, of course, use the EHO strategies as a way to measure governance. Is the sector regulated? So we have a toolkit that we use to define strategies for health, and so far 28 countries, the ones shown in green and in yellow, the diagram, have been able to produce digital health strategies that really speak to the way a country is going to approach digital health by having a strategy, an M&D plan, and also a vision, M&D plan and action plan. And that's the toolkit over there. Now, within the toolkit, of course, our way of approaching the maturity and growth of digital health is to move countries from that green button over here, which is from pilot. How do you move from pilot all the way up to national scale? So the toolkit is really a way of guiding countries to move from pilot to national scale. And so we use this as a way for us to be able to provide governance for digital health. Alongside the toolkit are principles that we've deployed. And these principles really speak to 10 things. Number one, implementations must be designed with the user. Ecosystem must be understood. We must design systems for scale and for pilot. Build for sustainability. That means that there has to be local capacity. And also be data-driven. And open source tools, when applicable, must be adopted. Avoid reinvention of the wheel. And also address privacy and confidentiality and also collaboration. Now, we have a tool that we developed at the WHO, which is really an interesting way of observing what implementations are taking place in countries. It's known as a Digital Health Atlas, and that's a home page. With the Atlas, you're able to navigate up to facility level to actually see what implementations each country is performing at country level, at facility level. And countries can use this platform to actually learn lessons from each other and also be able to adopt solutions that are working in other areas. What Atlas tries to avoid is the chaos that I'm showing. It tries to avoid an approach where implementations are done in a siloed approach. It also ensures that coordination is enforced when it comes to digital health implementation, and that these systems are flexible, and also, as many of you know, the whole issue of pilotitis. And another term, of course, these days comes up, which is appetitis. So many apps that are out there. So what we're really speaking to is that once you have deployed the principles of digital health, the grand goal is ensure that you're meeting the goals of the health sector as opposed to deploying digital health for the sake. Now I'm going to speak to a few key messages, which are four. Number one, of course, is that digital health, as interesting as it is, and the solution it comes with, must be designed for scale at national level for value to be achieved. And then secondly, we're really working towards shifting from solutions towards systems thinking, addressing the entire ecosystem as opposed to thinking about solutions. And then thirdly, the whole issue of interoperability, data security,
the issue of scaling up, which is a particularly important issue. The pilot test is real. So many countries have had little pilots here and there. And you also referred to the Vice President's, in these countries, big interest in electronic applications in various fields, including the drones project in this country. And if any of the Ghanaians here think I'm going to talk further about the drones, I'm sorry, I'll disappoint you. We'll talk about that later at the break. I would just like to be nice to make you aware of the details of the framework. We just pick some areas of interest to speak about today. And so there are just a few hard copies of these, but you can get them. The panelists can provide you with the links where you can download these documents that have details around the practical approach. And this is, which has been shown earlier, is the summary of the actual framework. You find a lot of details in this document and in others related to community health workers and other areas that have been spoken about online at the WHO Africa website. And so basically the overall goal of our discussion is getting to this healthy lives and well-being thing that we are all talking about, that our outcomes should be universal health coverage, ensuring that other SDGs work with this, making sure that people have access to essential services, that these are of good quality, that people actually demand, not simply have access, and that these are services that do not crumble once there's an outbreak or some other danger around. And of course, we still have to make inputs related to the core basic building blocks of the system in order to get there. And so I just want us to be reminded of this thing, particularly the issue of accountability coming out of governance. And as Juliet mentioned in her presentation, the need we feel to grapple with the issue of corruption and other factors that undermine achievement of health. And in some of the work to think about some particular questions, there was a lot said about context. What are our own priorities? Some of the work we've done shows that the NCDs are now the bigger burden of disease in many of the countries in Africa and other communicable diseases, but most of the money goes into the communicable diseases. What should we do about that? Then there's the issue of the sector structure that Juliet referred to around governance. We have the right setup to deliver goods. What is the essential package that is important for my country, or indeed for my district or county? And how can we determine and measure it? I think we've been told measurement is very important. What needs to be covered? Often we end up covering the rich and the urban, leaving behind the rural and the poor. And so sometimes we need to be careful how we define what is equitable coverage and who benefits from the limited resources that we have. And the issue of funding will remain always important. And I think somebody also mentioned the fact that what is efficient, what is cost effective in what we are trying to do. We just had the presentation on e-health, and sometimes flashing lights and all the things, the abstract and all sorts of things are very exciting, but often do not quite produce the results that we have. And so, okay, that's to show to show the links by which, by which you can get this document, and we'll be happy to get that to you again later. So we still have some 15 minutes of our time, so we might stretch it a bit, but I will now invite comments, questions, critics, support from the audience. Mention your name and please let us know who in particular you'd like to answer the question. I would also request of you that if possible, you stick to one or two questions. You remain succinct as possible so that we can capture what particularly you want to be responded to and focus on that. Thank you.